Today, we are going to talk about synchronous and asynchronous Apex. So, what synchronous Apex is? So, synchronous Apex basically means anything that runs at that particular time. And during that time, the screen actually sees a waiting sign or, what you call a loading sign or a spinner that stays on the screen while the action is happening in the background. Usually, when you would save or update a record, you would see that spinner, and in the background your trigger or your flow will run, which you would have written. That's what synchronous Apex is. It runs in the same transaction, has lower governor limits, and it's best for small and quick operation. That's what your synchronous Apex is. Now, what is asynchronous? As the name suggests, it runs in the background and user does not wait for it to complete. So user can still do his day-to-day job while this thing is running in the background. So example of this is future method, queueable method, batch apex, and scheduled apex. What these helps in is basically they have higher governor limits. They run in a separate transaction, and basically it is for bulk processing. Let's talk about what is a future method. So a future method basically is that runs separately to the current transaction. So let's say your trigger calls a future method. So once your trigger execution is complete, your future method will fire maybe immediately or within a minute or two, and it will lie in a particular queue based on system availability. It will fire again. So usually it is within a minute or two. That's what Future Apex does. It is generally used when you need to send out an information to an external system and you're not bothered what it comes back with, whether the information has reached them or not, but you have just sent out the information. That's what Future Apex does. Queueable Apex is the advanced version of Future method. In Future, you can just pass the primitive data types such as id, string, integer as parameters. Within Queueable, you can pass the whole S object, list of S objects, or map, etc. What you can also do is you can chain a queueable job with the next queueable job and all of that. So Queueable is much more stronger, more flexible, and allows you to do a lot of things which you cannot do with Future. Batch Apex is basically, let's say if you want to update 100,000 records, then you use Batch Apex. You don't do anything else with that primarily. So that's what Batch Apex is used for. Then you have Scheduled Apex. Scheduled Apex is basically you want to run a particular action at a particular time of the day. You want to run it weekly, monthly, or every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. That's when you use Scheduled Apex. Within scheduled Apex, you can call a batch class or a queueable class. You cannot call a future method from scheduled Apex. And within scheduled Apex, you can have separate logics as well, which are just for scheduled Apex as well. Coming out to the key differences between synchronous and asynchronous. So primarily synchronous runs immediately, asynchronous runs in the background. Synchronous has lower limits, asynchronous has higher limits, right? And most important thing is synchronous runs in the same transaction, whilst runs in the separate transaction. Right. Now let's go to Salesforce and see how we would actually write these classes. So first is a future method. So a future method is basically in any class, you can make any method as future by just annotating at the rate future, right? And then within that method, you can do whatever you want to do. But make sure the parameters are only primitive types such as id or string. Then we go to Queueable. What Queueable does is, it's a separate class which basically implements Queueable. What you need to have a must have within this class, otherwise Salesforce will not let you save this particular class, is this execute method, which calls the Queueable context. This is how you invoke your Queueable class. You can have the constructor and you can pass the S object, you can pass the whole list, map, etc. Just make sure you have initialized those here initially, and you can call, this is how you call your Queueable class. So you can put this line in your trigger and then your Queueable job will be enqueued. Usually you would do Queueable is when you would want to do a mass update, or let's say a parent is updated and you want to update all of its child. That's when you would do something Queueable. Then you have a batch job. Batch job is generally, let's say you want to update 50,000 records. So you would query those records in this start method. You would always use this query locator. What query locator does is, so let's say you are updating 50,000 records. Think from the for loop point of view. So what will happen is those 50,000 records will call this execute method in a loop. And each time this execute method is called, you can define how many records are going into this execute method. You can define any number between 1 to 2000. If you don't give any number, by default, it is 200. But you can increase or decrease the number depending upon how your database is performing, how fast or slow you want to do the operations, or if you're running into SQL issues, then reduce the batch size. If you're not running into SQL issues or any other time limit errors, then you can increase it to 2000 as well. This is the template of how you would write a batch class. It will have three methods: start, execute, and finish. In finish, you would just say, okay, the batch is finished, do this, send out an email or something like that. And in execute, all your logic lies. And start is where you would need to have the query locator and your query, as in what to fetch from the database on which you want to run your operations, right? This is how you invoke your batch class. So you can invoke, using this, you can invoke your batch class from a trigger, a queuable job, or execute anonymous. And what you can do is you can also invoke it from a scheduled job. Now, so scheduled job is primarily used. This is again the template of writing a scheduled job. Basically, it has implement here and it implements schedulable. It the execute method need to be there and it should have schedulable context. In queuable, it implements queuable and it has queuable context. In scheduled job, it needs to have this schedulable context. And that's all that you need to write a schedulable class. Usually, people would write a batch class and also implement schedulable within it. I would not recommend it. I would always recommend keep your logical execution separate and simple and easy to understand rather than having everything written in the same method, same class. It gets difficult to understand by somebody who comes at a later date as to understand what is happening in this particular class. So keep your method simple, keep your classes simple, use helper classes, create scheduled classes and all of that. These are the best practices that I can recommend to you. But at a high level, this is what synchronous and asynchronous is, and that's how you would write your queuable, batch, scheduled jobs, and future methods. Try writing some of these and see how they work for you. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer those questions. Feel free to reach out to me. Wishing you good luck in your Salesforce journey. Have a good day.